I don't know if you know this, but God loves you so much that it is His desire for you to live an abundant life. Well, it sure doesn't feel like I'm living in abundance. That's why today on Daily Renewal, I want to talk to you about some of the things that may be hindering you from God's best. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. If this is your first time tuning into Daily Renewal, I just want to ask you to consider becoming a subscriber to our channel below and hitting that like button. That helps us get the videos out to more people. And by doing that, that gives you access to over 100 different episodes of Daily Renewal that are all designed to help you in your Christian walk. You know, when I was in my early 20s, I had a lot of hopes and dreams and in being a sports superstar, and I wasn't a Christian, but I would pray to God as best I knew how, and ask Him to help me play well and all these things. And my sports career ended terribly, in my opinion. I was so bitter by the time I ended, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was a guy that I just wouldn't give up. I traveled all over Canada. I was waiting for my big break. And when I finally decided to give up, I just had enough of going through all the politics and everything to do with the sport I was in. I finally decided that I was going to quit. And 2 weeks after I quit, I would have had my big break. And as a result, I lived probably for the next, I think, 4.5 years, a life of absolute misery. I felt like my dreams were taken away. I felt like I was cheated, and it bugged me because I felt like God must hate me for me to go through all that only to quit 2 weeks before I get my big break. And it changed my life. I went from a real clean living kid to getting into a lot of things I said I would never get into, and I got into deep depression. And I don't even like going into a lot of the areas I was in my head, but a lot of people that knew me, they being from a small town, there was a lot of people that thought, I made it fairly far in my sport, especially for my small town I was in. But inside, I was dying. I was one of the most unhappy people that you'd ever meet. Now, for people that know me now, a lot of people say, that doesn't sound like you, Pastor Lyle. And I even have some of the listeners of Daily Renewal that knew me back then. And I had one girl that listens to Daily Renewal almost every day. And her first comment when she saw Daily Renewal was, "Hi, old friend. It's a pretty amazing thing watching how much you've changed." Well, the changes that have happened in me all have to do with my relationship with God. Jesus has absolutely transformed my life. And it wasn't until I realized that was all part of the plan. God knew that I was going to make mistakes. God knew that the promised land that I was trying to make it to really at the end wasn't going to satisfy me. And He also showed me not only that He hadn't given up on me, but that there was a plan for my life. And He was going to lead me to fulfill that plan. And it's with that I want to talk to you today, because maybe you're in a position where maybe you feel like you fell out with God, like you missed it. Well, God knows exactly where you're at, and He's not done with you yet. But you maybe have participated or done some things, or are currently doing some things that are keeping you from being able to receive God's best in your life. And that's where I come to you today, and I want to present some things to you so that you can analyze this in your life, because sometimes some of the mistakes we make that keep us from God's best become patterns in our lives. And it's God's desire to give you the grace to break those patterns so you can move into the promised land that God has for you. Now, I specifically use the term promised land. And the reason I use that is because God has given us some amazing examples in the Old Testament with the children of Israel, because it was his desire to bring them to the promised land. They had lived in bondage for years, and we're going to take a little bit of that journey this week. And today, we're going to talk specifically about some of the things that kept them out of the promised. And then we're going to go from there into some of the things that we can do that will help us enter in to the promised land that God has for us. So I want to turn to the book of Numbers today, and we're going to start in Numbers 13. We have to remember that the deliverance of the Israelites was not just to deliver them from something, but it was to deliver them to something. And that something was the promised land, the land of milk and honey, the land of abundance. You know, it's God's desire, according to John 10:10, for you to have life and to have it more abundantly. That's why Jesus came. And so in talking about that, let's take a look at a little bit of this journey, because it's important that we understand some of the principles that happen. Because the first generation of Israelites that made it through the Red Sea, actually, most of them didn't make it into the promise. So there's some things that they did here that kept them from that promise. So let's take a look at chapter 13 of Numbers. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. For each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." And if we carry on here, if you don't know, there was 12 tribes in Israel, and they sent a man from each tribe. So they send out 12 people, or 12 spies, to spy out the land. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." And then we pick up the story in verse 28, and this is where the problems began. "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." And then Caleb, one of the men, quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We're not able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land they had spied out. Now this brings me to the first problem with the story. We see here that God gave Moses and the people of Israel a command to go take the land. They go in, and there's no doubt that it was the land that God had talked about. It was greater than even what they could have imagined. And you know, often with us, God is trying to push us to places, and often we can even see, you know what? There's great potential in some of the things that God is bringing us to. But the problem arises when we start looking at the natural and get our eyes off of what God has said to us. If you're going to move into the promised land that God has designed for you, the first thing that you're going to have to understand is that there is going to be a battle. And yes, you're probably going to have to fight. There's no doubt about that. But we have to understand that if God has already told you that he's prepared the land for you and he's declared that it's yours, then you have to understand he's also going to give you the grace to win the battle. God is the one that is fighting for us. God is not just bringing you out to a place in the middle of nowhere so that you are going to be destroyed. And the people here, as you're about to see, the people believed what I will call the faithless report. Now, it's amazing. When you look at our culture, there's a lot of bad news out there. There's a lot of things telling you that there's no way you're going to be able to succeed. You know, we live in a time right now where at the taping of this particular daily renewal, there's people shutting down businesses. There's all the sports teams are shut down over a worldwide virus scare, the coronavirus, or whatever you want to call it. There's many names for it. There's a lot of people that are in fear over this. And I say to the people in our church, I said, we have nothing to fear. If God be for us, who can be against us? The Bible says that no weapon formed against us will prosper. Do you think that this virus took God by surprise? There isn't anything that happens in this world that God hasn't already foreseen and is going to keep you from fulfilling what God has desired for you to fulfill as long as you stick to what God has told you to do. So let's go on and look from verse 14 and what happened with the people. It says, so all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we died in the land of Egypt, or if only we died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he'll bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. And if you read on, that's where the trouble begins. Because God basically tells them, forget it. You're not going into the promise. You're going to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years. And that's exactly what happened. And that entire generation of people didn't make it into the promise, other than the two guys that went in and spied the land, which was Joshua and Caleb. They're the only two that entered into the promise because they're the only two that took God for his word and were willing to go in at the time when God said, go possess the land. So there's a couple things that I want to look at that I want to point out for us to be able to see so that we're not making the same mistakes that they made so that we can enter the promised land that God has for us. And the first one is when the bad report came, all the Israelites went to Costco and bought up all the toilet paper. Now that sounds crazy. Well, now we know they didn't do that, but I'll tell you what happens. When a bad report comes, what's the first tendency that people have to do is panic and go crazy. So let's look at how they reacted. Well, the first thing they did is they complained about their leaders. Isn't that amazing? Complaining is one of the first things we do when things don't go our way. We've got to, at a time when the pressure's on, the best thing you can do is shut your mouth and trust God. The second thing we see them do here is they get mad at God for his choice on how he's going to kill them. How convenient. They quickly forgot that they were dying a slow, painful death when they were in Egypt as slaves. They come out here and they're mad that God has brought them out in the wilderness to kill them. Well, he wasn't bringing them out there to kill them, but their complaint was that God was going to kill them a different way than they wanted to die. Which brings us to the third thing that we see here. The fact that they said, let's get a new leader and go back to Egypt. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. How were they going to do that? Were they going to say, let's everybody go out and grab a stick? Grab your favorite stick. We're all going to go back to the Red Sea that we came through, and whoever can part it, you're our leader. That makes absolutely no sense. Them wanting to go back, it's like there's no way they could have gone back. Who was going to do this supernatural feat of parting the water for them again? It was God who brought them through, and surely after being mad at God, he's not going to just sympathetically open back up the water so they can go and become slaves again. They were crazy. They weren't thinking straight. And the fourth thing we see that I find absolutely amazing is when they've got the two men of faith that are saying, hey, you guys, I want to encourage you. Think about this. What did God say? He said, let's go. He's shown us the land is great. And what's the first reaction they have? Is they want to stone the two guys that are trying to operate in faith. I'm going to tell you that when you're moving into the promise that God has for you, there's going to be a lot of negative people. There's going to be a lot of people that talk a game that is contrary to where you're going. And there's going to be people that aren't going to like some of the things that you're saying. But you've got to be one that keeps your eyes upon God. And we're going to talk about more of that this week. But we've got to guard against allowing some of these things to creep into our lives. Now, I want you to notice the biggest difference between the Israelites that didn't make it in and the two Israelites that did, Joshua and Caleb. God spoke, and the Israelite nation took their eyes off of what God had spoken to them. They took their eyes off of the promise and got their eyes on the situation that they saw in the natural. And as a result, they lost hope. The difference between them and Joshua and Caleb was Joshua and Caleb saw opportunity. And the reason they saw opportunity is they kept before their eyes and in their hearts the fact that what God said. And for us, as we're going to talk about more, if you're going to see faith arise for you to be able to enter into everything God has for you, you've got to get what God said into your eyes, into your ears, until it gets to your heart. When it gets to your heart and you believe it, we can trust God's word. If he said it, we just have to trust it and keep on walking according to his word, and God will do the rest. Well, I hope you're encouraged by that today. I'm looking forward to talking to you again tomorrow about how to enter into the promised land. Until then, God bless you and have a great day.